Welcome to Timeless Mysteries Live Edition. I'm here with Lee from the Devil's Advocate.
Hello.
Hey, Lee, how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for the invite onto your show.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. So today, I guess we're going to talk about Rex Heuermann. Is that how you say his last name?
I sure hope so. I've been saying that for a year.
Okay. I always want to be like Heuermann. It sounds better, but
yeah, I think it's
Heuermann. The Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann. They just had a hearing, or part of it was just an evidentiary hearing, or is it the trial started?
They had a Fry hearing, and that might be what you're talking about, the Fry hearing to determine whether or not the DNA science was good to go to trial. So I know that was the last thing. And then, of course, after the Fry hearing announced that the science would be allowed, then the DA announced that they're ready to go to trial. So I don't know that we've set an actual trial date, but the DA has said that they're ready to go to trial now. So.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I just want to say hey to everyone in the chat. I see some unfamiliar faces, but I want to give a shout out to Miss Olga and Molly. Thank you for being here. Hello, Robin, Essie, and Penster. I'm glad you're here. I see a few other names. Welcome, everyone. This is Timeless Mysteries. I cover true crime. I tend to focus on the psychology a lot. I think it's better than focusing on the crimes, you know.
Well, you may not know this, but I went into psychology in college, so a psych major was what I was wanting to be. And then, as a quick aside, I got to the point where I had done all my bachelor's and master's level psych courses, but I did shitty in things like chemistry. Like I failed chemistry like times, and they said, "Look, man, your GPA is never going to be good to go to grad school. And if you have a psych degree and you don't go to grad school, you're wasting your time. You're going to be a social worker. You're going to hate your life. You need to change majors." And I dropped out of school. So I did all the psych work through master's level, but never got the degree because I got depressed and was like, I guess I'm going to be a social worker the rest of my life. So anyways, so psych is a thing.
I kind of have a similar story, except for I started out at a community college, so I did get at least a 2-year degree. But while I was in my 2-year school, I was working 12 hours on and 12 hours off on Saturday and Sundays in a shared living facility with the idea that I was going to study psychology. And I quickly learned that people don't want help. And that's like the whole point of why I wanted to do it. And so by the time I got to Kansas State University, I was like, let's not do psychology. Let's study creative writing instead. So
hilarious, because I was also a writer. I loved writing.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I didn't finish. A lot of weird things happened, and I was going to go back. I had 26 credits left to go, and I don't know. Life happens.
Yeah, it does. Life does happen. I want to say, by the way, that I see a lot of we call them the Devil's Den because I have this Devil's Advocates theme. A lot of people from the Den over here. I see a lot of my names, Essie and 11 and Robin and Amanda. So thank you, people, for coming over. And it's great seeing my group show up to say hi to you as well. So anyways, thanks. I wanted to make sure I didn't ignore the people I see all my names that I've come in over here, which is very cool.
Yeah, I appreciate your what den what is it
the
called?
Den. Yeah, we call it the Devil's Den. Yeah
I've got I think I call it Timeless Advocates or something. I don't know, I need to come up with a better name. I know I've got
Yeah, having a community is important. I learned it from another YouTuber who has a very rabid fan base or whatever, and they have an identity, right? And I was like, man, we need an identity for our group as well. So I think it's important. It helps build that community and making people feel like they're part of something. Because I certainly feel that way for the people who support me, that they're part of my show and it's important for them. So I think it's a good thing to have something that kind of identifies your people,
Yeah. The thing with my channel is there's another channel who just started up like in March, and they're like stealing all my I don't know. It's weird. They're called Timeless Mysteries.
I saw them. I saw them when I was looking into your channel. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's another Devil's Advocate channel too.
There probably is. Unfortunately, it's not a super creative name, and that was one of the things I actually ran into when I made my business. Is there was already devil's advocate.
I'm like, I can't change my name.
Right.
It's kind of, I feel like I'm Timeless Mysteries now, you know. But I've been doing this for about 2 years, and it was slow going at first, and then, you know, this last year I think I've grown like by double, and I really enjoy doing true crime. So let me see. I guess let's just talk about Rex Heuermann. I'll let you explain a little bit about the case. I know you spoke with one of the attorneys for one of the victims. So we can just go into that. If you want to give an overview, talk about what it was like sitting down with this attorney.
Sure. Yeah. And I've got a gift for gab. So if I run off at the mouth too much, just trying to wave your hand or say something and I'll try to shut the hell up. But so to let you know a little bit about my channel is I focus a lot on playing devil's advocates with the official narrative. So mainstream media oftentimes paints a narrative, right? And in the case of Rex Heuermann, it seems like everybody's convinced he is the serial killer, right? But one of the things I have to say when I first started getting into the case was of the 7 bodies that are attributed to Rex Heuermann, and I'll cover for everyone a little bit of the history about how that started. But anyways, of the 7 bodies, I'm not entirely sure they're all Rexes. So at the end of the day, if you convict Rex Heuermann on all 7 murders, and he wasn't the one who did all 7 murders, then the actual murderer walks free and gets a get out of jail free card. And that's a problem for me. So I want to make sure, as I follow the case, that the 7 bodies they're attributing to Rex Heuermann really are all Rexes. But to give a little background of that, when I was getting into the true crime stuff, I started with Luigi Mangione, the shooting in New York City. And then I started to dive into Idaho 4, Brian Kohberger and what happened there. That's very close to where I live right now. That's been a major driver of the show. But as I picked up Rex Heuermann, and it's in New York with Luigi Mangione, I ended up just recently getting an opportunity to go to New York for the first time in my life and put boots on the ground. So I walked by Rex Heuermann's house. I've also managed to I don't want to say befriend, but make an acquaintance with attorney John Ray, who kind of started the whole Rex Heuermann Gilgo Beach search. There was a woman, I don't know how familiar everyone is on your show with it, but there's a woman by the name of Shannon Gilbert in 2010/11 time period that went missing. She called 911, said that someone was trying to kill her, went missing. And in the search for Shannon Gilbert, they found 4 bodies dumped along Gilgo Beach in New York on Long Island. And that started the Gilgo Beach murder. We realized there was a serial killer. So indirectly, Shannon Gilbert and John Ray is related to the Long Island serial killer, because we're not 100% sure Shannon Gilbert is a victim of the Long Island serial killer and Rex Heuermann. What they're going after is Rex Heuermann and the 4 bodies that were dumped on Gilgo Beach, as well as several other bodies along Long Island, none of which are directly Shannon Gilbert's case. Her case still largely goes unsolved. In fact, the Suffolk County Police has listed her murder as a accident / drowning. She drowned in the swamp. However, John Ray is convinced that's not the case, that she was murdered. Her hyoid bone and her bone in her neck was broken, for example, and she had no suggestion of being drowned in her lungs. So he's still pressuring, for years he's been pressuring, how you called this a suicide or an accident when she clearly was murdered. Now, whether he was Rex's or not is another thing. But to finally get you a breath so that you can talk, I will say that what happened is I reached out to John Ray. I saw him on TV a lot talking about Shannon Gilbert and his possibility that Rex Heuermann's family, his wife, Asa, and his daughter, Victoria, he believes, John Ray, that might actually be involved in killing, that they knew that the killings were going on in their house where Rex Heuermann was allegedly killing prostitutes in their home, and that they might have been involved. And that intrigued the heck out of me. So I reached out to John. John accepted my invite. He came on and we did an interview together. It was a fantastic interview. And then when I went to New York, I was able to meet up with him again and sit down in his office, and that was phenomenal. So I'll let you ask some questions before I get into more, because I've been talking a long time, but that's kind of the history of how we got there with John Ray.
Yeah. So I remember when this kind of first broke and Rex was the #1 suspect and they'd had some DNA, it was like a familial match, not actual DNA that matched him directly. And I thought that was odd, hearing you say that they think that maybe they are part of it, that could be possible based off of that initial DNA. You know, I know that they just allowed the whole genome DNA thing into the, it's going to be admissible. It's going to be shown to the jury as proof that he did at least kill, or at least touched, I guess. I don't know how a defense attorney is going to think about this, but I mean, if they got physical DNA of him on several of the bodies, that looks to me like he's pretty guilty. Whether or not he murdered them all, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, let me elaborate a little bit on that, because I think with Rex Heuermann, you know, they found a belt that was attributed to Rex on one of the bodies, but on several of the bodies, the only evidence they have linking Rex Heuermann to it is a hair fiber of his wife and another, I think, of his daughter at a scene. And the logic goes from the prosecution side is, well, this is clearly transfer DNA, that Rex Heuermann had picked up a roll of duct tape in his house, for example, which happened to have his wife's hair that got caught in the tape, and that's the reason why Rex's wife's hair is at the crime scene. Rex himself's DNA isn't at some of the crime scenes. It's just his wife or his daughter. Now, for those who don't know, when the Gilgo 4, for example, were disappeared and ended up being murdered and then later found, but at the time that they disappeared, like his daughter, for example, who had hair at one of the scenes, she would have been like 1 year old. So, you know, the idea that she was a 1 year old serial killer, not likely. So again, the prosecution will say, look, this is clear transfer DNA. His family's DNA is there, and it's because it came from the house. Now, people like John Ray are saying there's other explanations for this. Oftentimes, serial killers will go back to the scene of the crime to relive it or to momentize it, the kind of thing. And so he has reasons to believe that the reason the hairs are at those scenes may not be because they were there during the initial killing, but maybe they went back to the scene. Another possibility that he has, as crazy as this sounds, and I would be happy to lay it out for you, is that Asa and her husband were both killing together, and she had a different style than he did. And so this might explain why some of the bodies were chopped up, dismembered, and spread across Long Island, and some were dumped in burlap bags, which to me said that's two separate killers. And maybe John Ray's answer is, yeah, it is two separate killers, but they're in the same family, which would be super, super fascinating if that was the case.
So with the idea that they were a killer duo, that kind of changes things. If you think about the killer duo, they're very rare. Like somebody, there's usually a submissive and a dominant person. One of them's the leader. One of them, it's actually more rare, and I think less likely to be the case. From just looking at it as a story, statistically, I think it would be more rare. But if you think about it as a story, why would a woman attack another woman? That's totally plausible. First thing that comes to my mind is jealousy. You're with my husband. Boom. She strangles her to death and drowns her. That could be a possibility. I know the wife has divorced him already. She's trying to distance herself from everything. I hadn't really heard about this potential that maybe she was involved yet. Let me share a few things with that, because that's a fascinating story, what you just said. The divorce thing, I'm not sure. I know that it paints the picture that she's separating himself from him, but one of the things you have to understand if you look at this story is that Rex Heuermann was the primary breadwinner for the family. She didn't have a job. She had never worked a job. She also has a medical condition, and her family has some issues. Her son has some issues and whatnot, and he was the primary breadwinner. The divorce, some believe now, is they're very much on amicable terms, him and his wife. The divorce was a legal maneuver to get his name off the property so that she didn't lose the property when they went after him. So it wasn't a divorce because she turned on her husband or thinks he's guilty, but rather it was a protection mechanism to protect the assets. And that she still very much, there was a recent documentary where Asa went on and called Rex Heuermann her hero. She still thinks that he's a great guy and doesn't believe that he could have done that. Now, the daughter supposedly now is finally coming to grips with the possibility or the likelihood that her father is a serial killer. But she herself also was kind of pro his side. So I'm not sure the divorce itself really indicates Asa's moving away from her husband as opposed to as it was a protection mechanism. They also owned some property in South Carolina, I think it was, and same kind of thing. He sold the house to his wife, I think, for $1 or something like that, to try to move assets and stuff like that. So I think some of that's just posturing as opposed to an actual
separation of those two as an individual. The other thing I want to add too, by the way, is rumors. This is through affidavits given to John Ray that that Rex and his wife may have been big swingers back in the 1990s and actually had sex parties and brought prostitutes to the house. And therefore, the allegation that Asa had no idea what her husband was doing with these prostitutes may be hogwash, because there are people who give affidavits that said, I had been at sex parties with the two of them. I know that they're swingers. They were swingers with other police officers who were swingers at the area. So there may be a lot more to this story than meets the eye. And again, mainstream media is really good at painting a narrative and making everybody think it's one way. When you start digging into the weeds, and it may be far, far more convoluted than that.
Yeah, you sound like you know way more than I do about this case, because I didn't know any of that. But I do want to point out what an affidavit is, in case you don't know. It's basically a signed document stating that everything I say is true, and it sounds like somebody at least gave that to an attorney saying, yes, I was at sex parties with. I mean, that's interesting. I would like to see those. I know that as this case continues to move forward, especially with this new DNA being introduced into an actual case. I mean, this DNA testing has been used for the last 10 or 15 years already. They primarily use it for if you have to have a medication specific to you for cancer treatments and things like that. That's how they've been using it. They know that you can, when you do the whole genome sequence, you can, it basically, if you have somebody's DNA, you can match it directly to it. They know that it works. It's just very expensive. But New York has never allowed this type of DNA before. And I think it's going to change things. I kind of expect some kind of plea agreement to pop up pretty soon, because he's going to look a lot more guilty with this DNA being admissible.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that too, because one of the things I have a complaint about in our legal system as a whole, I'm critical about our legal system. And one of the complaints is about 93% of all cases never go to trial because they plea out. Part of the reason why they plea out is we stack the deck against the accused and convince them that there's no chance in hell they're going to beat the rap. So they might as well accept a plea and work some kind of deal for themselves. What's interesting about that is I talked to John Ray about that in his office when I was in New York just a week or so ago. And I said, part of me that is disappointed. I feel like, what's the likelihood we're even going to have a trial? He'll just plea. And his take was this: there's nothing for Rex Heuermann to plea with. New York State doesn't have the death penalty. I mean, the federal government, if they try him federally in New York, they can go for the death penalty. But New York State doesn't execute anybody, doesn't have the death penalty. So a plea deal would normally look like, hey, look, yeah, I am a serial killer, and I'll give you the names of more bodies and show you into locations in exchange for you taking the death penalty off the table. But the death penalty is not on the table in the first place. So as John Ray would say, what does the prosecution care what Rex gives them? There's no plea there's nothing they can give him. A comfier cell, maybe better conditions. I mean, what can they give him? He's already going to spend life in prison without the possibility of parole. So John Ray doesn't see a plea deal option for Rex, because there's nothing to plea for. There's nothing is going to be better for him. Again, though, that all presumes that Rex Heuermann is 100% guilty, and that if he had let me just break down a weird scenario. If Rex Heuermann was guilty of manslaughter, for example, not a serial killer, but maybe he did kill one of the girls and it was an accident and whatever, and it was a manslaughter thing, then their plea deal could come in, because if you look, I'll give you some information in exchange for making this not murder. It's making it's a manslaughter charge. It was an accident or something like that. But I don't even see that coming in this case. So I'm not sure.
I think, there are reasons for a plea deal. I mean, maybe the term of the sentence doesn't change, but if you go to trial, all of your dirty little secrets are going to be exposed. I mean, it's already bad enough now, but what if they get the wife to testify? Or, I mean, I think actually there's laws that protect husband and wives. So,
right.
But yeah, she's divorced. I don't know how that will work, but I mean, if there was swinger parties, those could be things that could be proven in court to support the prosecutor's story, because that's what they're basically trying to do, is convince a jury that with that this guy is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I mean, he's got a family. I mean, if he is the killer of at least one of them, he probably feels guilty enough to accept a life sentence. I think it does look very likely like he's the killer. I don't, I, I will not say he's guilty yet, but it looks like that. He
Yeah.
could get a better like prison, maybe a prison where he isn't in the general population,
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. I mean, to be fair, there are other reasons to plea for something. It's just, it wouldn't probably likely be for removing the death penalty. I'm not sure too, if you're aware, like there are, even the DA said this, Ray Tierney, the DA in this case said, look, we stopped counting bodies. Rex Heuermann may be one of the most prolific serial killers the United States has ever seen. They're thinking he has body counts in the hundreds. He's been killing for 30 years, they think, and including in Atlantic City, Las Vegas, possibly other states as well. And so if he's the level of serial killer that they think he might be, and they literally just stopped counting bodies because they said, look, every single time we come up and add a body to Rex Heuermann's list, we got to provide more discovery to the defense. There's more possibility that something goes wrong with that. So we just capped it at 7 and called it good enough. But where I'm going with that is that, there's an element of Rex Heuermann wanting to be proud of it. Right? If he's a serial killer and he wants to go down in history as the most prolific serial killer that we've ever known, there's a status symbol for some people like that. So is Rex Heuermann ashamed of what he did? Is he embarrassed? Or is he going to be like, yeah, bring it on. I'd love to tell you all the bodies and prove that my body counts in the hundreds and look at me. So there's that possibility as well. So this case who knows where it's going to go, but it's going to be an interesting case next year for sure.
Well, I think that's kind of not the right way that the prosecutor office should be handling that, because there are families who don't know what happened to somebody.
Yeah.
They're still missing if there is more bodies. I believe that HK2002 document that he listed out in a very meticulous way how he would hunt and kill these people. There was 87 people mentioned in there. I don't know if he actually got them all, or some of them he hunted them, but he didn't finish. I mean, it's still in discovery. It has been talked about, but it hasn't been, given to the public yet. And I think that one piece of information could be the clincher, even if the DNA didn't go through. I think it would have sealed his fate and put him in prison forever. But there's a lot of talk about how similar it was to the BTK, that he had like code words and, projects and things like that. And even Dennis Rader reached out to Rex and said, hey, we're very similar. I think it's kind of weird to hear that a serial killer reaches out to another serial killer, but I mean, there are similarities, but I don't know. I've never been able to figure out why somebody would want to kill somebody. And, I don't know why people would put themselves in a situation where they hear about all these things happening to sex workers, right? And then they end up in that situation and they expect it to be okay. It's hard for the police, I imagine, to pursue all of those cases when somebody disappears, somebody's looking for their daughter, and they've gone missing over the years many times, and then they pop back up again, and they just don't have the man hours to do the search. And, they're still looking technically, but, the case is open or whatever. But there is families out there, and I believe that, prosecutors protect us, like that protects society. That's what it's established to do. It's not just the police, enforcing the law. It's the prosecutors bringing the charges before the court so that, we can, punish these people accordingly. And if they're just saying, hey, there's might be 87 bodies or 150 bodies, but we only care about one because that's going to put him in prison. I guess short-sighted, that is good. He probably deserves it. But long-sighted, what about those other families?
Right. No, and you're right, but it's a catch-22 because you're right. It is horrible to stop looking at the answers for those other unsolved murders. By the same token, like the DA is essentially saying, this may never stop. We may be surfacing bodies for a long time. He may have been doing this for 30 years. And again, every single time a new body is added, you got to provide all that new discovery. And then you run the risk of having something go wrong. So it was a calculated risk, on their part to say, we're going to cap it at 7. They know there's more, or at least they're fairly certain there's more. And where does it leave the families? I mean, the families will have to, bring forward more lawsuits after this is done. So if Rex Heuermann is convicted of these crimes, there's nothing that stops the family from saying, hey, by the way, based on that trial, I believe that he's the killer of my family member too, and they'll bring up more. So those things can be pursued, but at some point they had to kind of put a stopgap measure. I was curious, by the way, if you knew the story behind the Suffolk County police commissioner, the Jimmy Burke or James Burks, that was in charge during the Shannon Gilbert stuff and all of that, because there was a lot of, in the early days, first of all, you were talking about prostitutes. Okay, if you're in that line of work, the law enforcement, they only have so much resources, right? So there was talk in the Suffolk County Police Department when Shannon Gilbert went missing. It was kind of that attitude of, well, she's a prostitute. She's going to show up again later on. So they just didn't really care all that much. It's kind of like, we get calls every day for somebody who went on that, she's probably on a drug bender. She's probably out somewhere for a while. She'll surface again. No big deal. Of course, the family is very upset and they're saying, look, we know her history. She wouldn't disappear for this long. Something happened, foul play, blah, blah, blah. But there was definitely that attitude in the Suffolk County Police Department that they're just prostitutes, who really cares, kind of thing. And then it turned out that one of the affidavits brought to before John Ray was a woman who has claimed that when she was 16 years old, she went to a party with a police officer by the name of James Burke. I keep doing weird. James Burke. Anyways, he was a police officer at the time. Later became the commissioner, the chief of police, I should say, for Suffolk County. When he became chief of police, he dismantled the task force looking into the Long Island serial killer. This 16-year-old who was at a party with cops back in the day, Rex Heuermann was there, she said. I saw Rex Heuermann. He was this enormous guy that came into the sex party. This guy came in. I got away from him. He was kind of stalking me. I was afraid he was going to die. She gave that whole affidavit. And it was weird that when Jim Burke was promoted to his position, the first thing he did was dismantle the task force looking into the serial killer, told the FBI he didn't want their help looking into the case anymore. And you have to wonder why. And again, the allegations start coming out that Rex Heuermann was partying with police officers, that they were swingers, that they all knew each other, that he was perhaps in gun clubs with them, and that he had connections. And one of the primary people in the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert is a man by the name of Peter Hackett, who worked with the police department in a kind of a forensics role of pathology or something like that. And he said he saw Shannon that night, and she came to his house and he treated her medically and sent her on her way. And then she ended up dead. And so there's a lot of questions about the whole police involvement and whatever. And again, I'm pro law enforcement. I know it sounds like I'm not, because I'm very critical of law enforcement, but as I would say, good cops don't like bad cops either. So there's a lot of bad policing in this situation. Suffolk County is a mess. And I think there's a much bigger story going on. But at the end of the day, that's not going to be the trial, right? The trial is going to be, did Rex Heuermann kill this person? Yes or no? And that's it. They're not going to get into who is he friends with in the department, who covered up for him, who tried to get in the way of justice and try to block that kind of stuff. That's going to be swept under the table. But
I don't know that it should be swept under the table, especially if there are those type of people. I mean, I hadn't heard any of that yet. It's really interesting. I think it's a good story. I think it needs to be told. I want to hear more about it, obviously, but let me see if I could find some information on the DNA that.
Yeah, the DNA is a big thing. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the DNA, because DNA is one of those. I got another case that DNA is a huge thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the DNA. Yeah, for sure.
So let me see. I was making a PowerPoint. It's not complete, but maybe I'll just share it anyway, because it kind of has some of the highlights.
While you're doing that, Nightbot, hello, Nightbot saying hi. So I'm saying hi back. I saw that. Hey, this is great.
I don't have actual moderators. I don't know. I've been meaning to turn that off. Let me see. It's opening, I think.
While you're digging on the, I was gonna say, while you're digging on the DNA, so give you so that there's not dead air. I will tell you this: so DNA is great, right? And there was a famous quote by a judge in a case that I just recently followed, the Idaho 4, where he says DNA is DNA every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And it's kind of this attitude that if you've got DNA, it's the end all be all. Like, I don't care what circumstantial evidence you have, if you've got DNA, it's a done deal. You got DNA. And yet, if you and I'm sure you probably do as well, if you follow enough cases, you realize DNA has falsely convicted people many times. There's many reasons why trace DNA gets at a scene. So at the end of the day, really the question also becomes, how did Asa's hair, for example, get to the crime scene of Rex Heuermann's kill, if it was his kill? How did those things happen? Because that the DNA is there doesn't tell the whole story. It's how did it get there kind of thing as part of the other story. The other thing that I worry about, and I want to get your thoughts on this when you get to the DNA stuff, is the average citizen doesn't understand the science. And so it becomes a conviction by baffling the public with scientific details that eventually your mind just checks out and says, whatever, if you say he's guilty because it's way above my head. The science, I don't know anything about genome sequencing, and I don't know about this, and I can't tell you whether you did or didn't. You tell me you tied it to this person, and so good enough for me, and we go on our way. I'm a little bit worried in some regards of our new trend of convicting people on the massive new cool science, which is great. I think it is good, but can juries follow that? Can they really, at the end of the day, are they just accepting what the scientific community tells them because they can't follow the logic and a layman can't figure it out?
I think that's kind of the way it works. They bring in experts to try to explain it to the layperson. And then, whatever information they give the jury, that the court doesn't like strike from the record or anything. All of that information is what they have to, technically, that's, the only information they're allowed to look at is like whatever the court like carves out for them to look at. And I don't think that everyone's going to understand the DNA. Let's see. I was trying to make this Word document a PDF so I could share it, but it's not working. One thing you got to know about DNA is currently in the CODIS DNA database that the FBI uses, what they're doing is they're looking for like 20 specific things. It's like a sequence in your DNA that appears not just in one place, it appears multiple times over like, your entire DNA genome. And once they locate that number, it differentiates you from everyone else. And that's how regular DNA works. They need, a drop of blood, a cheek swab, those kind of things will pull that DNA. It's fairly quick. It costs like between $100 and $200 to do the test. And it's fairly accurate. I think it's like 1 in a trillion chance that your DNA might be the same as someone else's, which is a huge number. But there's limitations because DNA doesn't stay 100% over the course of years. So if there's a body buried under the ground for 20 years and they find a hair follicle, for example, it may not have enough DNA in there to find that sequence of that DNA strand that they're looking for, to compare it to other people that they already have in the database. So what whole, let's see, what is it called? The whole sequence, the whole genome sequencing is what they call it. This is going to be used for the first time in New York. I believe it's been used in a couple other states, but I think the more it gets used, the more it's going to be used.
Sure.
There's, more than 600 cold cases that are being solved through genetic genealogy right now. That's how the Golden State Killer got found. That's actually a genealogist looks through like ancestry.com, traces out a family tree until they get to somebody who's maybe the person. And that's very expensive, by the way. There's hundreds of unidentified remains that get names, like these people have no names, that every year they are identified. They're no longer John Does. the amount of money spent on the Golden State Killer investigation was over $20 million. That's insane to me. If you think, I mean, I think I looked up the budget for New York prosecutor's office, and it is a pretty big number, but I mean, still $20 million on one person's case, that's taxpayer dollars going to this, you know?
Yeah.
The average cost for genetic genealogy testing is going to be about $15,000, you know, versus the regular method, which is a couple $100. You know, I guess in the sense of the total trial cost, the DNA is going to spend about 3% of the total that it's going to cost to have a trial. The STR is the short tandem repeats. That's the DNA sequence that they're looking for, and it's they check for these specific numbers. You know, it'll be like GATA, and then it repeats at different intervals, but it repeats, and they can track it. There's actually only a 1 in a billion chance of a random match. I think I said a trillion a minute ago. And there's limitations. It has to be an intact DNA, you know, at least 100 base pairs to be usable. It requires fresh samples, and it doesn't work with rootless hair. And I don't know, that's a whole like thing you can look up, rootless hair and DNA. It's interesting.
Except for I think this new science that you were talking about, the one that they just did the Fry hearing on, was for a rootless hair, right? It's a new scientific method that is relatively unproven. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the regular test doesn't test for that. The whole genome sequencing, this is kind of revolutionary in crime. It's not revolutionary as it's been used. As I said earlier, it's been used for the last 10 or 15 years, I think. But it reads the entire billion letters of a person's genetic code. It doesn't just look for those 20 spots and try to match it up. It looks at the entire thing. So it's like, if you imagine DNA is a book, the regular test that everyone uses now, that's what the CODIS is based off of now. They're like pulling like a sentence out of, you know, a couple different chapters, and then that sentence matches, and that's a match. What this does, it doesn't look for those 20 matches. It doesn't take the little sections. It looks at the big picture. But the difference is that it requires somebody to match it to. So they can't put it in the database. It actually costs about $10,000 to do this whole genome sequencing. That's a significant amount of money, and it takes up to a year and a half to get results. So it will be able to use that rootless hair. They will get the exact match. They do have Rex Heuermann's DNA now, so they have something to compare it to, and it will say, you know, if that hair matches him or not. I think I read that Suffolk County spent $130,000 on the Gilgo Beach murders already on DNA stuff. It's kind of crazy. I'm trying to look through my notes here. I'm probably going to publish this thing on my channel that has all of the specific information written out in a legible way. I'm trying to like read through it and kind of pick out the bones here. But there's a limitation with DNA. You know, with mitochondrial DNA, when everything else fails, the limitation is that you can only tell, you can match it to the mother It's kind of strange. And I think that's how come at first we had heard about the familial DNA match. And it made me think, well, maybe this guy's got a brother and he didn't know about it. But yeah, I'm trying to see the touch DNA evidence. That's like with the Koberger case. It was just like a little fraction of a DNA sample on the clip of the knife sheath.
Yes.
It's
less than what can be seen by the human eye, even in that case.
Really?
It was like a pico something. It was smaller than a grain of sand.
Yeah, I've got written down that it's 5.37 octillion times more likely to be his DNA than anybody else's. You know, octillion is a number that I can't even imagine, you know, but it's a real number.
What we have to be, I feel, and I'm not saying that the differences of that kind of magnitude aren't important, because they are. But one of the things also that's a strange anomaly about DNA that people don't seem to realize is that human beings in general share a crap 99.99 something percent similarities between all humans. If you're human, you match with a 99 point something percent certainty to any other human, because what separates us, hair color, eye color, those differences are a very, very small amount of the DNA. So one can sometimes manipulate the statistics. We're saying, well, there's a 99% chance that it's so-and-so. Like, all of us are 99% chance, point something percent chance to be the killer, because we're humans, and a human most likely did it. So, but yes, the differences also could be quantified in ridiculously large numbers, where the differences are the likelihood that any other human being shares those specific differences. But I just bring that up just because it's funny, because people don't really focus on how much similar DNA is to each other. You know, we are very, very similar in DNA. Very, very small amount actually distinguishes the differences between us.
Yeah, but you know, like I was explaining with the short tandem repeat analysis, you know, it's just looking at small sections of DNA. You know, it's looking for, like, for example, AGAT, you know, it's looking for that particular sequence to repeat. And I don't know why it repeats, but it does repeat for everyone. And that's how they can identify, you know, whose DNA is whose. You know, the combined DNA index system, the CODIS system that the FBI uses, is able to, you know, put that information in a database. So once they get that sequence, they just plug it in, and then the system starts looking for a match. And, you know, that does take time, but it just does. I mean, it's really a pretty neat system, and I think it's very helpful in catching criminals. But, you know, it is limited to actual DNA that's like a whole, you know, DNA. It's not, it can't be degraded in any way. You know, when I think about the John Benet Ramsey case, I can't remember if I heard that they've checked with the whole genome sequencing, but I believe I did hear something about that. I didn't quite understand what they were talking about until I started reading about this specifically, because they didn't have DNA that, like, a good sample of DNA for that case either. And that's been over 30 years that they're still trying to figure out who it was. And there's like hundreds of different theories on who did it and why. But if they used something like whole genome sequencing, you know, it has the limitation that they have to have a person to test it against, but it might actually, you know, like they could test it against the father and then take him off the table for 100% certainty that he did not do it. You know, it's a...
That John Benet thing is going to be fascinating, by the way, just as a side tangent. I was at in Aurora, Colorado. I was at CrimeCon 2025. It was it was CrimeCon Denver, but it really was in Aurora, Colorado. And in that case, there was a huge focus on Othram Labs, who helped supposedly break the Brian Koberger DNA stuff. And it was pointed out to the shock and dismay of the audience that a garrote, kind of like a homemade garrote that was used in the JonBenet Ramsey thing, has never been tested for DNA to this day. And there was a gasp in the audience, like, how the hell can that have happened, that we've gone this long and no one's tested it? And the author, of course, was hinting that they're going to break that case after all this time. They're going to do some DNA testing, and they're going to, and it was kind of like a promise to the audience of, trust us, we're going to go back and test that. It's never been tested. It's fundamentally ridiculous to think that that's never been tested. There's reasons why it supposedly wasn't tested, that it had been tainted and touched by too many people. So now you don't know that you can trust the DNA on there. But kind of like you said, what you can try to do is exclude certain people. It for sure doesn't have this person's DNA on it, so you can exclude them. So you may have other people's DNA that shouldn't be there, but you should be able to exclude some people. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that case. But
yeah, I know with that case particularly, the parents were always a suspect. I've never believed that they were involved in it. Just the way that they presented themselves afterwards, they were completely, distraught in almost every interview I saw. And the brother, I think, was too little to have really gotten that angry that he could have done that. I know that they had NBC or somebody had him smash a watermelon or something on the news. And then everybody was like, oh, he did it. But yeah, I'm not heavy into the JonBenet case, but I will know that I know people that are fairly convinced that the brother did it and that the parents covered up for it, kind of thing. Like, the parents didn't do it, but they helped cover up for their son that did it, and it was maybe an accident. And then this whole thing has just been a case of trying to keep the embarrassment out that it was an accident, and it's become a huge national thing. And I don't know. Again, I'm kind of speaking out of turn because I haven't followed that case like I should have. I mean, I was obsessed as everybody back when it happened, but shoot, that's 30 years ago now, and I didn't get back into the JonBenet case. But I have people that follow my channel that are like, you need to get into the JonBenet case because this is gonna be huge. And I'm like, well, it's interesting. And the whole thing for me, the reason why I don't believe it's the child is because he was 9 at the time. And if he did do it, he wouldn't have went to prison for life. He would have went into a hospital, got treated, and probably got out and lived a normal life. So why would they hide it?
Yeah.
That's what I have always thought. Like, why would they hide that?
It's a good question. I mean, because my channel is Devil's Advocates. To play Devil's Advocates, you have to ask yourself, did the family at some point? I mean, once you get it too far into it and you get national attention and you're on every single TV and everybody wants to do, does that become maybe I don't want to solve this crime? Because one can argue some people like the limelight. Now, are the Ramseys those kind of people? I don't know. I'm not saying that that's what they're about. But the point being is that one could say, well, maybe it started out as a simple, maybe the son wouldn't have gone to jail, but by having it be an unsolved mystery, it becomes a case that we're still talking about 30 years later, and everybody knows their name. And would they have been nobody if it was just oops, it was an accident? So I don't know.
I think so too, but I don't think it was an accident. I think somebody actually was there. I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs. It's a lot of speculation, and but there was an investigator who did some very extensive research and found some really good information, and he still couldn't. I think it prevented the Ramseys from being indicted for the crime. But he still couldn't prove anything that any of the, it's weird. It's a very easy to get into case because everything about it is interesting. There's all kinds of room for speculation. And I think with people who watch true crime, that's their favorite part, I think, is, questioning everything and looking at it from different angles.
Right.
But let's get back to the DNA. I was going to say in Utah in 2021, the whole genome sequencing confirmed a genealogical lead in a homicide case, but it wasn't admitted into court. In 2022 in California, the data supported another case, but it went to a plea deal without a formal ruling. And I don't think they actually admitted or prevented it from coming in. And then in 23, it was used in a sexual assault cold case. And the results were accepted after an expert stipulated on it specifically. So it is fairly new that it's being used in court cases. And then I did want to get into the price tags for these things. So DNA extraction with the STR version is about $150. The for the whole genome sequencing, just extracting and amplifying the image is about $2,000. The sequencing analysis of the STR is about $200. With the WGS, it's about $3,000 to $6,000. So it just gets way more expensive. Even the interpretation of the report, with the STR, that doesn't take much. It's about $100 to get an analysis of a report of that. With the whole genome sequencing, it's about $3,000. And then the expert testimony prep is going to cost, for the STR, about $500, and for the whole genome sequencing, it's about $5,000. So we're looking about $1,000 for the standard way of presenting DNA versus $15,000 for this new way. The Heuermann's case has a forensic budget of above $100,000. So that's how they're able to do it. I think they're expecting it to cost about $5 million total for the entire case. I mean, that's insane to think about the numbers, right?
Yeah, and like you said, it's taxpayer funded, which again, leads back to that thing that we talked about, which is, on the one hand, do you say it's not right that the DA stops going after other cases that could be involved because it leaves people unanswered questions, but the cost becomes astronomical. Every single new person you add to that's going to cost more. So you have to weigh the taxpayers' tolerance as well. Like, we're going to blow a whole bunch of taxpayer money prosecuting this guy. At the end of the day, how much money do you want to spend? The other thing that I'm concerned about it is again, that kind of money that's all taxpayer going to be supported, and that kind of money at the end of the day is going to, in my opinion, because I'm a bit of a skeptic, is going to go over the heads of a typical jury. You're paying for very, very high-end scientific data that the jury doesn't understand. So now you got a huge price tag to have somebody tell you something you don't understand and then convict based on, well, I guess it must be true. Look at how much it costs us to get the answer. So it must be true. And I'm skeptical of that kind of system where we spend that kind of money that ultimately a jury can't put just common sense on it. They have to trust the science and just say, well, it's the science. You can't argue the science. And it's a tough, slippery slope that we're on in that regards, in my opinion. But
I think with the experts, the good experts who they're able to explain things in a layperson's terms so that it can be absorbed, and, they got to, take that evidence and weigh it with their decisions, and, an expert witness is going to have more weight than, a friend of the defendant, or, the defendant himself even, it's going to just have a little more weight. I mean, but you can't think about it as, a price tag. But I just wanted to show the price tag because I don't think people get how much these trials cost. I don't think people understand, even with like just like a regular assault case trial. It's expensive. But this man has multiple bodies tied to him. Each one of those is going to, and if they're only doing 7 right now, for some reason I was thinking there was 11 tied to him currently, but
There's 11 to 13, I think, that are kind of tied to him, but they're only going after 7 of those. So yeah, you're right. The number you have about like an 11 is a number, but I think they're limiting the trial to the 7, I think.
But to me, it's interesting just from like the processing this kind of thing, because you got people working this case for years, right? looking for these people. That's man hours, them doing the work that they're getting paid for. And then, I mean, people with like serial killers, especially, they're costing taxpayers millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And we don't see it that way. We're seeing it as, oh, he's in prison. Hey, that's good. We caught him. That's great. He's off the street. That's good. But the cost is huge. I mean, I don't think people think about it, you know?
No, it's important. And I hope it doesn't bother you for me to go this direction, but that's part of the reason also why it bothers me so much, that there's a level of police corruption in here. The chief of police dismantling the task force. The district attorney at the time also was doing some very shady shit and had connections. And where I'm going with that is, it already costs a lot of money. Then if you've got people who work for the taxpayers who are supposed to be working in your favor, and they're thwarting the investigation, therefore making more money to be spent and more years spent because they could have solved this a long time ago, that those kind of people need to be held accountable, in my opinion, because they're wasting your money too.
I agree 100% with that. You know, if they're like, you know, putting things aside, you know, so, you know, it actually just costs more money in the end. Because somebody else eventually, like with you know, detectives, they don't always, you know, the chief detectives or whatever they're called, the person in charge, you know, that changes every few years. So sometimes cases will like be put on pause, put on the back burner, you know, whether it's intentional or not. But even if they stop and then start back up again, there's, you know, a significant cost that, you know, they have to repeat again to start the search all over again.
Yeah, and Robin in the comments has a great points. This money issue is part of the reason why plea deals also are so popular, is because it saves the taxpayers money. You know, you can pitch it as, just like in the Koberger case, there was a lot of people who thought that should have gone to trial. And the prosecution's defense was, look, we saved everybody a ton of time. It was a foregone conclusion he was going to get convicted anyways. By taking the plea, we saved everybody a bunch of money and a bunch of needless time and a bunch of aggravation. So that money factors into putting pressures on plea deals as well. Look at how much money we'll save if we don't have to fight this out in court for the next year. So,
yeah, you know, kind of going with the, you know, your theme of playing devil's advocate, I think, you know, the cost is, I think they should pay it. You know, they've got $1 billion budget or whatever. And what happens if they don't spend that money? Does it just carry over to the next year, or does it go into somebody's pocket? You know, right. I think they need to be spending the money to make sure that they got the right person and that they can prove it the best way that they can. Plea deals, especially in states with the death penalty, I think, you know, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence with the death penalty anyway. I don't think I would personally push for it for if something happened, you know, with my family or friends or something, you know, but at the same time, if they're suffering in prison, I'm not going to like, you know, lose any sleep over it. But I mean, they need to, you know, find out how many people this guy killed. They need to find out as much information as they can, just to, you know, that money is set aside for them to prosecute these cases, but it's also for the people, the victims' families, to have that closure that they won't get from these types of crimes.
Let me put you on a difficult, I'm going to test you with a difficult question, how you feel about this. This is a feeling question, so there's no right or wrong answer. How do you feel if Rex Heuermann gets leniency in some kind of plea in exchange for giving information about somebody who doesn't know what happened to their daughter? So do you feel it's in the best interest of the public to say, hey, look, some parent out there doesn't know what happened to their child. Rex is going to come forward and say, yeah, I did it, and here's where I did it, and here's how I met them, and here's how I killed them, so that they can have some closure, so that they know what happened. But in exchange for him telling that story, he gets leniency, and he gets a little lesser sentence or a little better deal. How do you feel about that? Is it good for the family to get the closure that they now know he's the guy, or is it there's no leniency for a monster?
I think it's more important for the family of the victims to know what happened, because if you could imagine not knowing if somebody was alive or dead for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, Like you're going to be going back and forth in your mind, oscillating between maybe they died, maybe they have a family somewhere and they just like disappeared in another country. I mean, you're never going to know, and you're always going to wonder. Getting the closure is better for them so they can move on. But any deal that a criminal gets if they're still in prison isn't that great of a deal, really, in my perspective. I had a guest on the other day who is an advocate for prison, he's trying to, prison reform. There's a lot of like horrific conditions that these prisoners are in. And, I told him, I don't feel guilty, we're not worrying about them suffering. But at the same time, if I was the guard, I wouldn't want to be the one that like makes the inmates sleep on the black asphalt in 127 degrees, because that feels inhumane to me if it was me, making the decision. But Israel Keys, he got candy bars and cigars when he was talking to the FBI about some of his stuff. But he's still in prison, If Rex Heuermann gets a better cell, with a thicker cushion, he's still in prison. If he gets a cell with a window, or, he doesn't have to share a cell with somebody else, he's still in prison.
Yeah. And it's a difficult thing too, because for the closure thing, there's a lot of nuances, but if Rex, for example, were to give up information about an unsolved crime so that it gives closure, the difficulty is that him just saying he did it isn't enough, because again, there could be that narcissistic view of him that maybe he wants to get credit for having 1 million. There's been many people who say that Ted Bundy inflated his numbers because he wanted to be known as a bigger deal than he really was. And he lied about how many people he killed just because he wanted to be a bigger deal. So then you have to get details, right? You can't just get I did this, and that's not going to provide closure. You need to be, here's how he did it, and here's the details, and give some information that shows that only the killer could have known that. That's the only way to get closure. But in that itself, is that not painful for the family to hear exactly what happened to their loved one? I mean, yes, there's the closure element, but do you want to know the details about, oh shit, like I didn't know it was that bad? You know what I'm saying? So it's careful what you ask for on those kind of plea deals. But
well, with the closure, they don't necessarily need the specific how and whatever, but they probably just want to know, like, are they dead? Yeah. I think just knowing that and, finding their remains, right. Think of the Natalie Holloway case. Her father and mother like spent 20 years trying to capture the guy they knew did it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you got a great point. Like if Rex Heuermann had been killing for 30 years, and if he can give a dumping ground and say, hey, by the way, go look in this area, you're going to find bodies, and then they can DNA test those bodies. Do we need to know the details about how he got them and how he killed them? No. But if he can get closure and be like, we found this person, you've had them missing, you don't know if they ran off to Germany and just got married and have kids and lived a whole life, or whether they really died back when they went missing. And now here's the proof. Yeah, they did die. And this is where they ended. So there could be closure in that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the public will probably want to know the details, but I don't think that the family of the victim needs the specific details. I know I personally wouldn't want to know specifics. I wouldn't want to see like images or anything if there was, but that's just me. Even when I write about true crime, I kind of like skim over the gore, because if you look at too much of that stuff, it just like sticks in your head, and it just sticks with you. I was thinking of another case, but it slipped my mind. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here.
It happens. It happens. Yeah. And as far as the DNA thing, I'm really interested to see how it plays out in Rex Heuermann's case. Again, I think, my guess is this trial is going to be wrapped up pretty quickly next year. Again, for me personally, the bigger story in the Rex Heuermann is going to be the stuff that's not going to come out in court. But from what I understand, Rex Heuermann has a lot of circumstantial evidence, tying his vehicle and cell phones and stuff like that to the victims and locations. So they've got a lot of circumstantial. And then if you can convince a jury that the science is good, that not only do we have circumstantial evidence that says he was in the right place at the right time, but now his DNA or his family's DNA is at the scene, good enough, they're probably going to close that pretty easy next year. And I don't know what happens after that point, because like you said, if he is a 30-year prolific serial killer, 7 bodies is going to leave a lot of unanswered questions. How many people aren't going to get closure? And it's going to be interesting to see how this case plays out.
Yeah, it is an interesting story for sure. And I mean, a lot of the details already are more than what I knew. I mean, when you look online to try to find, stuff on this case, you have to kind of be weary of what you read and what you absorb, because half of it's like speculation and, presented as facts. And then sometimes the actual facts get downplayed, and it's just kind of hard to maneuver through this stuff. I know that when I research it, what I look for is, court documents, first of all, and the police records, if I can get them for free. Those things typically the best way to feel comfortable about giving the facts of the case. So I did have a court document. One thing I do want to talk about also is the HK2002 document, and I don't think it's a PDF, so I may not be able to share it. I don't know why StreamYard doesn't allow you to share Word documents, but you can't.
Yeah, I've done it where I have a second monitor and I'll share the screen so I can show it on screen at least. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I can do that too if I can find it.
That's what I've done, is I put it on a second screen and then I share the screen in StreamYard. And then you can zoom in with your zoom into a pretty tight level and be able to share it.
I did save it as a PDF, so I should be able to share this. It is from the September hearing.
Yeah, and I think the September hearing was the Fry hearing. I missed it because I was actually on the road to CrimeCon, I think, at the time that happened.
It wasn't, as far as I know, it's not public. It's not on like a video. You can't watch it. You can only read the notes after that. But I imagine after the case finalizes, you'll be able to probably request the audio if you want to listen to the actual, these hearings. I think you can get them. It should be technically public record. There's usually a fee with that, but so I'm going to add this document. Hopefully you guys can see that. But this is pretty significant data. It's let me see if I can, it's not showing on the screen there. It's 37 pages long. And I'm going to look through it here on my computer to find some of the good information. Well, I don't know. I'll share this on my channel, and you guys can look at it in detail. But this talks about his car. This talks about all kinds of things. It shows a map of where they found bodies. They talk about the human hair that was recovered. All of this is very detailed. But in this, they try to get the DNA admitted. But what was also recovered was data from a computer that he deleted that they were able to recover. And in it is his, his murder plan. Like, you could tell he was very meticulous about that. And he uses these, terms. And if you kind of break that down and you try to look at it as like a criminologist would, it says a lot about the person's personality, his motive, why he would do it. It changes the kind of narrative of the FBI profile for serial killers, because he wasn't just, one of the two types that, they typically would say he was. But
I want to add something to that. I want to add something to that that's really, really fascinating. And I won't say exactly where I got this from, but one of the things that came out, this was so if I were a serial killer I'll tell you what I wouldn't need. I wouldn't need to make a list to myself of remember next time to use trash bags, or remember that, like, I think I can probably remember what mistakes I made last time and not have to make myself a checklist. Somebody came up with an interesting comment, which is that when Rex Heuermann's house was shelled out, his wife Asa did not have a computer. She allegedly shared the same computer with her husband. And one of the things that somebody speculated in is, how do we know for sure Rex Heuermann is the one that's making notes, and it wasn't something like his wife saying, next time you do this, make sure you do this, this, and this as a checklist for her husband, or vice versa. So if there was a potential other person and they shared the computer, it's again, the easy answer is, oh, well, Rex Heuermann had a list on his computer reminding himself of what to do. What if it wasn't reminding himself? What if somebody else was reminding him because they were sharing stuff? And that's a weird angle. I don't know that I put a whole lot of weight into it, but just what I want to do is be careful when we just assume that that was Rex Heuermann writing his own notes, because if that computer was accessed by multiple people, we're not 100% sure if it was Rex or if it was somebody else in the family that was writing those notes, which again, if you're leaving the possibility open that there is more than one person involved in these crimes, then now you have to find out who had access to the computer. But it's interesting.
You know, for some reason, I was thinking that it was found at his workplace, but I could be wrong. I don't have I have it written down somewhere in like this thing that I've been working on, but you know, it's
from what
massive.
I remember, what I remember is he had a computer, and I thought, and you may be right, but I thought he had a computer that they found at the house that had pornographic material on it, and the big kicker, the one that I thought you were alluding to, was a file that he had actually allegedly deleted that included names like I thought like DG1 for like, and they assume it's dumping ground 1, dumping ground 2, things like this, and checklists that he had apparently deleted, but forensically they were able to restore the files. And I thought that was at his home, but maybe it could have been at his office. But
I could be wrong, but I think I found a part of this document that actually talks about that. You know, I forget who the witness was, but they gave a person a name as witness 3. And the defendant had begun living together at target residence in 91, September 93. But, well, I don't know where the good place to start is. But if you read through this entire thing, it makes more sense rather than just skipping around, because it starts, you know, it follows like logic as you're talking about it in this hearing. But the newly discovered digital evidence is Exhibit A. Heuermann's arrest. Numerous search warrants were executed at the target residence. Seizure of over 350. I'm gonna have to move my camera, maybe. Sorry, I'm trying to read this from here. That ain't gonna work either. Here, let me just read through it on the actual power, on the actual thing here. Just give me a second. My camera is blocking the screen. Where was it? I think it was, yep, I'm almost there.
I'm still trying to get out of my head while you look for that I responded to a bot in the chat. I can't get out of my head. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not even a person, that's a bot.
Yeah, Nightbot is an auto-populated like mod. You can have it do things like you know, block certain things. I don't have any of those things turned on, but it just, I never remembered to say, hey guys, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. I never remember saying that.
I never saw it before, and I just totally fell for it. It was awesome.
Yeah,
but I can't get out of my own head now, because I'm like, oh, I just looked like an idiot, didn't I?
No, nobody saw it.
Nobody saw it. It's on record.
So yeah, there was a seizure of over 350 electronic devices in months subsequent to Heuermann's arrest. The Gilgo Homicide Task Force has attempted to extract, analyze the data from each of these devices. An analysis of these devices has revealed significant collection of violent bondage and torture pornography dating back to 1994. I mean, there's a lot of information on here. During the analysis of the hard drive recovered, this was the basement of Heuermann's residence. So you are right. It could possibly be the wife.
Yeah, and it might be just wild speculation, but it just brings up the point that we're not 100% sure what was going on with that, especially if they both had access to the computer. But
yeah, oh, I remember what I was thinking about earlier, and I said I lost my train of thought. With the DNA being on these victims, I mean, technically, all it really proves is that he had been with them, not that he actually murdered them.
Correct. And here's the thing, like, I don't know if you saw, great point, because I don't know if you saw this. There was a great documentary. I've seen several documentaries on Heuermann, and I don't remember which one it was. I think actually it was the one by Josh Zeman called The Killing Fields. And what they had a guy on there who's kind of an expert in serial killers. And he said, look, his famous line, he was kind of German or Russian. He's like, you're not dancing with one serial killer, you're dancing with two. But one of the things that he pointed out is that the killing styles between the four of Gilgo Beach, which were people intact bodies bound in dumped in burlap bags, versus those that were chopped up or whatever, seem to be two different killers. And what they pointed out was sometimes killers will compete with each other and then desecrate each other's crime scenes by dumping their bodies at the other person's. And it could be a game. And I know it sounds crazy, but this is apparently documented stuff that sometimes killers will get in this kind of like pissing match of desecrating each other's scenes. So now the question is, even if Rex was a killer, is the DNA at the scene? It doesn't tell the whole story. It tells that Rex Heuermann's DNA ended up at the scene, but it doesn't tell you how it ended up at the scene. So was it deposited there by somebody else? Was it a part of a game, or did there's lots of answers that won't necessarily be asked in the trial, because it's going to be they want the simple answer, I think, but.
Well, he was, I mean, if it is his DNA and they can prove it, all it really proves is that, he engaged with a sex worker. Technically.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, right.
But because his DNA is on there and nobody else's is on there, that's going to be, what the jury's probably going to hear,
Sure.
And it doesn't look good for him. I mean, if it had like 20 other people's DNA on the body and those people got excluded because of, alibis or whatever, but
it still leads some it leads to the interesting question of how some of those bodies, and by the way, I guess I said Killing Fields probably, and I get what it was Killing Season on that documentary. So if I said Killing Fields, it's because there was a freaking movie called Killing Fields, and I keep getting them cross-referenced. But again, the other weird part is that if Asa's hair, for example, his wife was there, or his daughter Victoria, and not Rex's, then that leads to other questions like how did he avoid his DNA getting at the scene, but his wife's hair was at the scene, or his daughter's hair at the scene? There's a lot of questions that I'd like to know, the mystery part of it, like that's the mystery part. Like, how did that scenario happen? How did the wife's hair get there and not his? And I don't think he left any semen DNA on the bodies, so there doesn't seem to be a sexual element to it. So then that becomes, and I forgot what the name of it was. There's another individual. I bet you one of my people in my chat know, if they're in the chat. There was an individual that was accused of a couple of murders of some women, and now that they think are Rex's, and they're re-looking into that case and it has semen DNA, but I don't think the Rex left semen DNA at the scene. So there's a lot of, I feel like this case has potential to have a lot of really interesting stuff if they ever poke into the weeds, but will they poke into the weeds? I don't know. Yeah, Bittroff. Yeah, Bittroff was the other name of the guy, John Bittroff.
The thing with a trial is, the burden is on the state to prosecute their person. They got to make the jury believe beyond a reasonable doubt that he's actually guilty of what they say he's guilty. And,
right.
There's going to be other factors that may or may not allow the jury to agree and, say that he's guilty on these specific charges, with, what's her name? Kaylee Anthony, the woman who she was on trial for murdering her daughter or whatever.
Yeah.
I forget
Casey
her name.
Anthony? Was it Casey?
Yeah, I think it's Casey Anthony. She got acquitted, but if the state had presented the case as a murder 2 instead of murder 1, right, she might be in prison. But right, they had the burden to prove that it was murder in the first degree, and right, they didn't meet that. And it got, she got acquitted. Now she can't go to trial for that crime anymore. She got charged with other.
this is the same reason why, you know, they stopped at 7 and maybe, you know, right? Because again, the more complexity you add, all you have to do is fumble one of those 7 murders or 8 murders or 9 murders or 11 murders, right? And the more pieces you put into it, the more that they could fumble one. And then if they fumble one, does it then ruin the whole case? And could it, you know, lead to a problem to convict? And so on the one hand, you can kind of understand why they would narrow the subject down and avoid some other ones, because the more people that get involved, the more complexity it has and the more that you can make a mistake.
You know, but the thing with a murder trial like this, he's going to be charged with murder in each murder. So even if like 10 of the charges get, you know, not guilty and one of them sticks, he's still going to spend the rest of his life in prison. You know,
yeah.
So I think if you look at it that way, it still, to me, doesn't make enough sense. I think that they should try to get as much as they can. It also makes sense, you know, that they can come back later and charge him on these other crimes. And I mean, I guess if they try to gather as much information as they could possibly do, it's going to take a couple of years to compile the discovery in a logical way. Like go through and look at each detail and see, hey, this is something I should present to the judge and this isn't. I mean, there's going to be thousands of more man hours for every single body that they do, they find. But I hadn't really thought of that part about, you know, they can just charge a new crime later.
And there could be
that makes me a little less like, you know, concerned with the prosecutor's office and why they don't want to get him for all of his crimes. But I mean, they've got, you know, 7 right now that they think they can convict him on. So he's been indicted, got the charges, they're getting ready for trial. But you know, they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense attorney, all they got to do is poke holes in the logic. You know, they can use tactics like disrupting the evidence flow, because the prosecutor is telling a story for the jury and they got to present it in a certain format so that it like builds on itself and that the jury member, the individual, can like follow along. If they, you know, somehow get witnesses thrown you know, in a different order, that could change the narrative of the story. You know, imagine your favorite book, you know, if the chapters were rearranged, it may not make any sense. That's kind of how a prosecutor plans out these kinds of things. But this HK2002-04 document is really, really interesting. And, you know, I hadn't considered that maybe it wasn't him, but, you know, because there has been female serial killers, but I just don't think, I don't know. I want to believe that this is Rex's work, you know, but this document here, it goes over exactly what they found, where they found it. During the analysis of a hard drive recovered from the basement of Heuermann's residence, the Gilgo Homicide Task Force discovered a Microsoft Word document titled HK2002-04. The document was discovered in an unallocated space. I don't know what that really refers to. A located space refers to stored data that a computer is using, files that are viewable and able to be opened. So if it's in an unallocated space, then it's, it goes on to say, it refers to unstructured data. This is readily not viewable, and it's probably in the recycle bin. But it had a lot of really interesting similarities to the way BTK documented his crimes. And, you know, I don't know why they want to document these things, but, you know, there's a lot of planning going on for, you know, it's a methodical blueprint. It's a plan of, you know, murder. And there's like he had headings like this, like problem supplies, DS and TRG. you know, we don't know what those acronyms are exactly, but they think it means dumping sites or target, things like that, but we don't know for sure. If this is Rex's document, this paints a whole new picture of a serial killer, I think. And I mean, it's really, I think this right here alone is probably going to get him convicted, especially once they go through it on the record with a jury, because it makes him look like he's planning all of these things. There's 87 like different things listed in here, and you know, pre-prep, recon, pick zone. You know, serial killers do that. The Golden State Killer used to walk neighborhoods, you know, and look for people who were, you know, gone at certain times so he can get into the house before he commits the crime. Even BTK, like he, you know, he had his projects. He would stalk them before he would kill them. Well, he would stalk them before he would bind them, torture them, and then kill them. Read that, the book on him. It was really about the sex acts and the bondage more than the killing. You know, he had this weird, like, sick way of thinking about it. And I think the murder for him was just to cover up the crime of the torture and stuff. But like I said, I'll put this on my channel and you guys can look at it in detail. But there is, like, this document right here, this part of it is like very detailed, and it's gonna sway a jury, I think, unless the defense can somehow keep it out of the trial, which I don't know how, but I mean, a good defense attorney might have a way of preventing it from being admissible. And I mean, technically it's in there right now, but the jury may not have access to it. The public does. I think it just says a lot. Have you read much about this yet?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I enjoy breaking down the legal documents and looking through the discovery and those things that they present to us. And, you know, and as far as that file goes in particular, you know, it was talking about the allocated and unallocated space. I mean, a lot of people do know this, but like, you know, it had traditionally been the case when you delete a file, you know, it's not really gone from the hard drive. It basically just allocates that space where that file used to live to be rewritten over. So if nothing rewrites over it, the file's still there to be forensically recovered. So in this case, this document had been deleted, right? And so, but they were forensically able to get it because nothing had been written over the file, and so they could recover the file that's just kind of sitting there in this space. Now, you asked about, well, can they get it dismissed? Well, that's going to be what the legal team is going to be like. They're going to be like, well, hey, this file was deleted. It's not, you know, so they might make an argument about whether or not it can be recovered that way. That's probably not going to stand up. But again, if you have, and it's not going to come up in trial, but if you have elements of corruption in the department, then you're like, how convenient that you have a blueprint. This is how he did it. And he just wrote it all down and basically made a confession. What's the best way to convict somebody? Look, we've got it all written out. This is exactly what he planned on doing. Well, is that document legit or not? If they fight the legitimacy of that document, they might say, how convenient for you that you have a blueprint of how he did his killings. That's exactly what you would need to convict him. But is that really his document, or is that not his document? So if that was his attorney, I'd be fighting that document and saying, can you prove that was his document? Because that's what you're going to use to hang him in the court of a public opinion, is to say he wrote it out. This is his confession, his manifesto, if you will. So the question is that a legitimate document or not?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it lines up with a lot of crimes that they've, you know, so I mean, it at least applies to his, I mean, to these victims that they're going to be prosecuting him for.
And I want to be clear in case people think that one way. I want to be clear. I do believe Rex Heuermann is a killer. So while my show focuses on the presumption of innocence, and I do believe strongly Rex Heuermann should have the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. But if you tell me my gut feeling is, yeah, he's probably killed people and maybe killed a lot of people. But I still will give him the presumption of innocence, because that's what I believe strongly in our country we should do, is he has the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a fair an open trial. And so that's what I focus on. So when I'm defending the whole, I'm not sure that's the case, it's because that's what we should be doing, is giving him the benefit of the doubt until proven guilty. And if the evidence shows that he's guilty, then hang him, stick him in jail, whatever, for the rest of his life. I have no sympathy for him, but I have to maintain the looking at it from skeptical. Like there's going to be pressure to convict this guy and to solve cold cases and put a bow on it and take the easy answer. Is it the right guy? And in convicting this guy, are they letting somebody else walk because they didn't want to ask the more difficult questions?
That's a good point. And I've actually bring this up a lot. Like we talk about on my channel, we talk about cases. We watch police interviews and stuff, and there's all these red flags that pop up. And I'm always like, just because it's a red flag doesn't mean it's guilt. I mean, you got to imagine it if you were in this situation and you are innocent, right? You would want the state to have a very high burden to prove the case against you,
Yep.
And if they can just like say whatever they want and paint the picture, as persuasively as they want, and you don't have a proper defense against that, you're going to go to prison, even if you didn't do it. People do get convicted of a crime that they didn't commit. It's not that rare. But at the same time, when I don't know, like the whole process is better, like then it's better that we like do it this way and, maybe potentially convict somebody who is innocent, a very rare amount of time than to let people go to prison who are actually guilty of the crime. And the process is set up in a way to protect the defendant's rights. It requires the prosecutor to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So they actually have to compile all of this evidence, and they have to be able to present it in a way that an average person can believe it's the truth. And the judge is sitting there, kind of as a referee to make sure that the information is presented in an unbiased way. Because you don't want information coming in that could unfairly bias somebody against, the person who's being on trial there. And that includes other cases, not just murder trials, but, regular DUI cases. Out here in Alaska, they call them OUIs. I don't know what they call them in your state. But, operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol or drugs, there's a procedure, and that procedure protects the person. They got to have probable cause to stop the car. They can't just say, I just felt like checking his car for no reason, But if a guy like hunched over his steering wheel, parked on the side of the road or at a stoplight, that's probable cause. We're going to find out what happened. Is this guy okay? And then they smelled alcohol. It's very important, and it is a delicate system that it is to protect our rights. We see these killers, we're the public, we get all this information that the jury doesn't necessarily have, and it's easy to form an opinion based off of what information we have. It's the same thing for the jury, and that's what the judge has to decide, is what goes in, what is going to be in their neat little box that's going to be presented to the jury. And then the prosecutor decides what is in the box already that the judge has said is okay to go to trial. They're going to figure out the best way to present the information so that it's not just in a neat box for the jury. It is a good story that's logical, that they can follow easily to convict the defendant. The defense attorney, like, our rights are, we do not actually have to testify against ourselves. We don't have to say anything, and the burden is still on the state to convict them. You don't have to say anything at trial. The state can do all the talking, even if you don't have a defense attorney. And the jury can't use that against you. They have to think about the evidence that they're presented with. Being in the public, we don't have that little box. We get all the things, plus all of the speculation, plus all of anything else. We get to apply other cases and other theories from other situations to this specific one. And I don't know, that's personally why I enjoy talking about true crime is because it's very complex. There's a lot of information that you can use to frame your opinion a certain way. And you know, I guess like the big point of all of this is, you know, I fully agree with you that we should presume innocence, especially if you're on the jury. You know, you gotta be at least willing to accept the fact that maybe this guy's innocent. You know, you gotta look at the evidence that they give you. You gotta be able to make a decision, and figure out what evidence has more weight than others. I mean, as a public member of the public, you know, I don't know what I mean. I would have to, like, I feel that that document that we just looked at in that record has a lot of weight, but you don't. And that's the good thing about a jury. We don't all have the same biases. We don't all have the same information. You know, our histories play into that. So whenever the attorneys are picking juries, you know, they want to pick somebody that fits within what they think is going to, you know, somebody who's going to agree with them. And each side has a certain amount of people that they get to, like, say, no, I don't want, for no good reason, you know, just because they take them out. And then they, what do they call it? The
voir dire process.
Yeah, voir dire.
Yeah, voir dire. Yeah, voir dire or voir dire. I've heard it both ways. Yeah.
Year. Yeah. And it's important. And it's important that I mean, I've never been on a jury. I don't think I will be able to be on a jury anymore, because unless it's a civil case, because I have a true crime channel, and they're going to ask you, well, what are your hobbies? You know, I write about true crime. Yes, I can be unbiased. I can consider that they may not be guilty, but I don't know.
I think you said it. I think you had a great summary. And I would say that while it aggravates a lot of Americans, I think, to watch somebody guilty go free on a technicality, we decided somewhere as a society a while ago that we would rather a few guilty people go free because of a technicality than for one innocent person to go to jail for something they didn't do. And be thankful that you have the presumption of innocence, and that you can't just piss off a cop and be accused of something and you go the way the rest of your life because he didn't like you on a personal level, or he wanted whatever, you know. So be thankful that you have the presumption of innocence, and that the burden of proof is on proving your guilt, and that you already you don't have to prove that you're innocent. They have to prove that you're guilty. And it's a good system in that regards, that the burden of proof is on them to prove that you did something that you should already be assumed that you're innocent until they can prove that you're not.
Yeah, one of the cases we talk about on my channel a lot is the Chris Watts case. And, you know, there's a lot of red flags on the mistress, like regarding what she did after you know, it broke on the news that he started saying, no, my family's missing. There's, like, she deleted stuff on her phone. She, like, made these weird phone calls. There's, like, cell phone tower pings. And, you know, there's a lot of easy red flags to spot in that case. And then she still didn't get convicted of anything. And she very well may not have had anything to do with the crimes. She may not even have, you know, suspected any of that. But it just looks bad. And that's why people still talk about it. And I tell people on my channel all the time, just because there's red flags, it doesn't mean you're guilty. You know, it could look bad. You could just have a guilty conscience, you know? You feel uncomfortable talking to police officers and you're nervous. So it, like, you know, makes their, like, you know, they tune into you. They're with a dog with a bone. Like, oh, well, he's nervous, so that means something. And then, you know, I don't know. I definitely agree with the process. I think it's a good process for, you know, any crime, even small ones, even petty crimes, even misdemeanors. You know, the process is, it protects you. As long as you don't take a plea deal, you know, you have rights. Once you take a plea deal, you give up all those rights. I don't think people understand that.
I want to, I don't want to beat this to death. I probably need to get going pretty quickly here. I got some things I have to take care of, and I just realized how long we've been going. But I did want to correct something, and maybe it's not necessary, but at one point you said, well, I think that document on his computer was good evidence. You don't. I do think it's good evidence. That's not how I would have worded to say it's not good evidence. What I'm saying is I would, if I was his defense attorney, I would challenge that, right? That would be an area I would challenge. It doesn't mean that I don't think it's good evidence. I'm just saying that that would be an area I would challenge to prove it. He wrote that document and that's his document, and that something wasn't planted or something like that. That would just be but that doesn't necessarily tell you how I feel about the matter. So I just wanted to clarify that. But
well, yeah, my argument wasn't, I mean, I guess I misspoke really, but I was just trying to prove my point that, two people could have a different opinion on the same bit of information. And I mean, we were talking about the same thing, I guess, but you brought up that, well, what if that's not the case? What if it's not his? And I hadn't even considered that. So, I mean, that's kind of what I was pointing out, not necessarily that that's what you thought.
Fair. When you said it, I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure I said that."
No, I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to,
show the point.
The point was the jury. Everyone's going to have a different mindset going into the thing. When you first hear about something, nobody's going to have the exact same thoughts, on the subject, and that's what I was more pushing.
And that's why attorneys will tell you don't know when the jury gets convened and they're going to make the verdict. You still don't know how the people are thinking inside that. You want to believe, you want to hope that you made your strong case, but at the end of the day, they're sitting there on pins and needles going, I have no idea what the jury heard. I know what we said, but I don't know what the jury heard. So at the end of the day, it's a jury of your peers for a reason. You got to hope that you got through to people and that they understood your case and rule in your favor.
When you hear good lawyering, when they make a good argument, sometimes you can hear it. You can just hear the brains clicking into place, like, oh, I agree. And I mean, I think it's kind of rare, but if you listen to other hearings of any kind, sometimes you just hear this random attorney just blow the other attorney out of the water with their logic and their way of talking about the specific law that they're talking to, and it gets cases thrown out. It turns DUIs into reckless driving, gets people completely off of a crime. I mean, it's a good lawyer is very important. And I think, I don't know, I've heard these arguments sometimes, and it just I'm like, wow, that's good lawyering, because it's within the confines of the actual statutes that they're discussing, and it basically changes the perspective of you as you listen to it just by the way they word things.
I suspect you're a lot like me because you like to look at the legal documents, and I suspect you're a lot like me when I love watching. It's like slow for some people, but I love watching a good legal fight take place, and I'll read the document. I'm like, oh, that was a good point. I don't care what side it's on. I just appreciate good that back and forth drama between the prosecution and the defense and the civil liberty issues and it's awesome for me. I love that stuff. I just love getting into the weeds of those documents and going, oh, that was a really good point.
I actually, I do love that stuff. And I do agree that a lot of people think that stuff's boring, but not to me. I can listen to hearings that, are just simple ones. And I still like to listen to the details, the way they argue the case and present their case and things like that. It kind of goes back and forth. So you can also hear the opposite, a prosecutor who doesn't do their due diligence. They don't look at the right evidence the right way. And, a case gets thrown out because of, they neglected to do something that they should have done because maybe they're overworked. Maybe that particular prosecutor's office only has 4 attorneys right now. All the other ones are on vacation or they all quit. Who knows? Everybody is an individual in these in these trials and hearings and things. They all have their own thing. They all have their own problems, and that all affects the information that's going to be presented at court on a particular day. So one day that attorney could be terrible and the next day they could be brilliant. It's like there's no two cases that are going to be argued the same way ever. Even if the details are like 90% the same, there's going to be something about that hearing, that case that's different. One little thing, even if it's just the people involved, different police officers, different, a different street. I mean, everything plays into the overall story and whether or not they can prosecute or not. And, with felonies, they have to go to grand jury. They have to present their case. It's just the prosecutor present all the facts that they have to a jury, and then they have to get an agreement. Yes, that's enough information to prosecute this as a felony. And then it goes to Superior Court and it gets tried there. If it doesn't happen, if it's not a felony, then it's a misdemeanor. Here in Anchorage, that's a city case usually. Well, sometimes it's a state case, I guess. But the charges are much smaller and the stakes are much lower. And I think, there's a lot less work sometimes that goes into that because, they get bogged down with, misdemeanors like, $5 bread theft from Costco or something,
Right.
and like those still have to get prosecuted too. Because if you don't, then people are going to do it more. And then if more people are doing it, then your community is not safe. And if your community is not safe, then people don't want to live there. And then the city doesn't have any income and then it disappears, So, I mean, the prosecutors work with the police, and then, that's all designed to keep the general public safe. And even, when a defense attorney like argues for somebody that seems guilty, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's appropriate. Somebody needs to argue for him, at least make sure that the probable cause is good, that they have legal grounds to admit this evidence. And, they need to look at all of those details, because what if it was me? And what if I was innocent? I would want somebody to take the time to make sure that they're not giving like a jury all of this information that's kind of, what's the term? It's not like, sorry.
Biased?
Not biased. Like the difference between you watch snow fall on the ground versus you wake up in the morning and there's snow on the ground. I can't.
Circumstantial versus
evidence could get you like in trouble, because circumstantial evidence isn't always true. You're making assumptions about that evidence.
Correct. Right.
But sometimes it is admissible in court because it is easy for you to assume that there's snow on the ground because it snowed last night. That is still a true statement. I mean, even if you didn't see the snowfall, it's still a true statement. If I was driving, they didn't see me driving, but I'm like, I'm parked on the side of the road. They open the car door, they smell alcohol. I'm on the side of the road, that they can presume that I was driving. I'm not in my driveway or parked in my backyard or anything like that. So, there is a place for circumstantial evidence, but if there isn't a good defense attorney to protect you, that circumstantial evidence could be the end of you, because you can make an argument almost about anything with circumstantial evidence.
If you're a good storyteller, you can make circumstantial evidence look like it's facts. And
But anyway, we have been here for quite a while, but I've had a good time talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me on your show. It was a real pleasure. And it's always best. Like I always say, it's not great to go with somebody who thinks exactly like you, because you're just parroting each other and saying the exact same thing. The fact that we have little nuances that we have different, I think that's what makes it great. I love the fact that you gave us some time to and we didn't really argue about anything, but we presented some different views of stuff. And I think it's been great. So thank you for having me on the show. And I hope that I know there's quite a few of my people watching right now. So I hope that they give you a like and a subscribe as well. Show you some love for showing us some love on our community, and appreciate you giving me the time to be on here with you.
Yeah. And everybody, make sure you go check out his content. He's got a lot of good stuff. I think you guys will enjoy it. His channel is Devil's Advocates. And I think I've got the link to, I think, either the trailer or something in the description. So it should be easy to find. And make sure you go watch some of his videos, like and subscribe. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. You know, I've been growing over the last year, and I keep trying to get better, but my numbers go up and then they go down. It's like, I just want to get over 17,000.
I know that watching the numbers can drive you nuts.
999. And then I'd lost like 30 people. It's like, how does this happen?
Been there, done that, man. Been there, done that.
Yeah. All right, guys, it's been great. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Sunday, and I'll catch you in the next video.
Thank you, guys.